First story, The Sergeant Who Vanished in Vietnam, 1968. War does things to a man's mind. It warps it, makes you see things, hear things that shouldn't be real. But what we saw that night in the jungle wasn't the war playing tricks on us. It wasn't fear, exhaustion, or some fever dream cooked up by the heat and bloodshed. It was real. I know because I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. And to this day I still wake up sweating, seeing that light, hearing the screams, feeling the gun in my hands that I knew was useless. We were deep in the Vietnamese jungle on patrol like any other night. Our boots sank into the damp earth, the air thick with the stench of rot and gunpowder. Every shadow felt alive, every sound made my heart jump. But then the jungle went dead silent. No insects, no rustling leaves, no distant gunfire. Just this oppressive, suffocating quiet. And then came the light. It was a blue so bright it burned, cutting through the trees, making the world look unnatural, like we had stepped into some other reality. Sergeant John Frakes, our leader, barked orders for us to take position. He thought it was a flare, maybe some new Viet Cong trick. But as we raised our rifles, I saw his face twist in confusion, then terror. His feet lifted off the ground. Not like he was jumping. He was being pulled. Slowly at first, like an invisible hand was gripping him, then faster. His body stretched upward, his arms flailing as he screamed, "Shoot me! Shoot me!" We didn't hesitate. We opened fire, unloading everything we had. The jungle lit up with muzzle flashes, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. But our bullets didn't do a damn thing. They passed right through him like he wasn't even there. That was when we saw it. A metallic shape above the trees, smooth, seamless, humming with a sound that made my teeth ache. It was massive, blocking out the stars. Frakes was almost to the treetops now, his screams turning into something unnatural, something garbled, like he was speaking but the words were being scrambled. And then he was gone, yanked into that thing like a puppet on a string. The light vanished, the jungle snapped back to life, and we were left there, weapons hot, hearts pounding, staring at the empty space where our sergeant had been just seconds ago. No blood, no body, just nothing. We reported it, told the higher-ups exactly what happened. They put it down as MIA, told us to forget it, but how the hell do you forget something like that? How do you forget watching a man get taken by something that shouldn't exist? They made us swear silence. Not officially, no paperwork, no threats, just the kind of unspoken order you understand when you've been in the military long enough. We were told Frakes was MIA, that war takes men in ways we can't always explain. But we knew what we saw. The problem was, the more we talked about it among ourselves, the less it made sense. Every single one of us saw him get pulled up, saw the bullets pass through him, saw that ship hovering over the trees. But when we tried to describe the details, something felt wrong. The shape of the object in the sky. Was it round, oval, sharp-edged? The sound. Was it humming, buzzing, vibrating through our skulls? And Frakes, I swore he screamed for us to shoot him, but another guy in the unit said he just gasped, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. It was like the memory itself was shifting, warping, getting further from us the harder we tried to hold on to it. I remember the look in Corporal Hayes' eyes that night when we set up camp again. He was one of the toughest bastards I knew. Had a scar across his cheek from a bayonet fight, had taken a bullet in the shoulder and kept going. But after what happened to Frakes, he wouldn't put his gun down. He just sat there, gripping it so tight his knuckles turned white, rocking back and forth. "It's not right," he kept muttering under his breath. "Not right, not right, not right." We all felt it. The jungle, the air, even us. None of it felt the same anymore. The next day we tried to track where Frakes had been taken, but there was nothing. No broken branches, no disturbed earth, no trace that a 6-foot-tall man had just been yanked into the sky. It was like the jungle itself had erased him. And then the dreams started. I don't know if it was just me or all of us, because no one wanted to talk about it, but I could see it in their faces. The way they'd wake up in the middle of the night, breathing hard, looking around like they expected to see something standing over them. In my dreams, I was floating, just like Frakes. I could feel something wrapping around me, something unseen but solid, holding me in place. And there were things, not men, not animals, just shapes, shadows with too many limbs, too many eyes. They didn't speak, not with words, they just looked, and in that look I could feel them pulling something out of me, like they were rearranging me. And the worst part, I woke up with the taste of metal in my mouth, the same taste I'd had when that light hit us. That same thick electric taste, like the air before a lightning strike. I stopped sleeping. It wasn't a conscious decision. It just started happening on its own. My body would shut down from exhaustion, but my mind refused to let go. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was being watched, like something was waiting for me to drift off so it could slip into my thoughts, dig its fingers into whatever part of my brain still remembered that night. I wasn't alone in this, either. The whole squad was unraveling. Hayes barely spoke anymore, his eyes sunken, darting at every movement in the trees. Private Lee, a guy who used to hum to himself when he was nervous, stopped making any noise at all. And Rodriguez, Jesus, Rodriguez was the worst. He started mumbling about seeing Frakes, about how he would wake up and see the sergeant standing at the edge of our camp, just staring. His mouth is open, but he ain't saying anything, Rodriguez whispered to me one night, his breath stinking of fear. Like he's trying to scream, but forgot how. I wanted to tell him he was losing it, that it was just a trick of his mind, but deep down I knew better, because I had felt something watching us too. Not just paranoia, not just war nerves, something real. Something that had taken Frakes and left a part of itself behind. And when the radio crackled with orders for us to move out, I felt nothing but relief. I just wanted to get the hell away from that place. But war doesn't let you run. It doesn't give a damn about what you saw or what you think is chasing you. 2 weeks later, we were deep in another stretch of jungle, pushing through mud so thick it swallowed our boots, when we heard something overhead. A low hum, almost too faint to notice at first, but the moment it hit my ears, every hair on my body stood up. It was them. I knew it, felt it in my bones before I even looked up. The same electric buzz, the same pressure in the air that made it hard to breathe. I barely had time to react before the light came down again, cutting through the darkness, like a blade. Everything went silent, just like before. No insects, no wind, nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. But this time it wasn't Frakes they wanted. This time, it was Rodriguez. 1 second, he was right, there in front of me, stepping forward with his rifle raised. The next, he was floating, his head snapped back unnaturally, his mouth open in a soundless scream. His fingers clawed at nothing, body twisting as he was dragged upward towards something hidden beyond the canopy. I remember the way his eyes locked onto mine, wide and wild, pleading. And I just stood there. My rifle was in my hands, my finger on the trigger. But I knew it wouldn't matter. I had already seen what happened when we fought back. The others screamed his name, but I didn't. Because I knew he was already gone. The light flickered, pulsed, and for a second, just a second, I thought I saw something inside it. Not just the shape of the ship, but figures. Tall, thin, with 2 long limbs and smooth, featureless faces. Watching, studying, the moment stretched, and I felt something press into my skull, not physically but mentally, like fingers digging through my memories, flipping through them like pages in a book. They weren't just taking us, they were learning us. And then, as suddenly as it came, the light vanished. Rodriguez was gone, just like Frakes. And we were left standing there, frozen, the jungle coming back to life around us as if nothing had happened. The higher-ups called it another MIA, another name on a list, but we knew. And that's the worst part, isn't it? Not just that we saw it happen, but that no one would ever believe us. War is full of horror, full of ghosts, full of men who go missing without a trace. But this wasn't war. This wasn't some enemy ambush or a mission gone wrong. This was something else. Something older. Something that's been watching us for a long, long time. And maybe, just maybe, it was never really about Frakes or Rodriguez. Maybe they were just test subjects. Maybe next time it'll be me. After Rodriguez was taken, something in us broke. We weren't a unit anymore. We weren't soldiers. We were just waiting. Waiting for the next one to disappear, waiting for that light to come back, waiting for something we couldn't fight. The days blurred together. I don't even remember if we slept, ate, or spoke much after that. The jungle felt different. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Those figures, those things in the light. Not in my dreams, no. This was something else. I would be awake, fully conscious, but for a few seconds at a time, I'd see them, standing just beyond the trees, watching, always watching, and every time I'd get that same electric taste in my mouth, like I was breathing in something unnatural, something not meant for us. Hayes lost it completely. One night I woke up to the sound of his rifle chambering around, and before I even had time to react, he was gone, just bolted into the trees, screaming about how he wasn't going to let them take him. We went after him, of course, but deep down I think we all knew he was already lost. We found his gear scattered along the trail, his boots, his rifle, even his dog tags, but no body, no blood, no sign of struggle. It was as if he had just vanished. Another name for the MIA list. Another piece of proof that something was hunting us. By then, we stopped trying to explain it. We stopped looking for patterns, stopped trying to convince ourselves it was something else. No one wanted to say it out loud, but we all felt the same thing, that they weren't done yet. And we were running out of men. There were only 4 of us left by then, and every time I looked at the others, I saw my own fear reflected back at me. We were all waiting for the moment when it would be our turn to go. Some nights I swore I could feel it happening, my body going weightless, that unbearable silence pressing in, the hum vibrating through my skull. But it would only last for a second. A warning, maybe, or a game, because I think that's what it was to them, a game. They weren't just taking us, they were seeing what would happen, how long we would last before we broke, what would happen to the ones left behind. And let me tell you, by the end, there was nothing left of us. No fight, no courage, no hope, just fear. When we finally got pulled from that jungle, I expected relief. I expected to feel safe again, to put it all behind me. But the thing is, you don't leave something like that behind. You don't just walk away from it. It follows you, it stays with you. And I know because I still feel it. I still taste that metal in my mouth some nights, still hear that hum when everything goes quiet. Sometimes I wake up and swear I can't move, like something is holding me down, studying me, deciding whether or not to take me this time. And you know what scares me the most? The fact that they haven't. because that means they're still watching, still waiting, and one day when I least expect it, that light is going to come for me. Just like it came for Frakes, just like it came for Rodriguez, just like it came for all the others, and when it does, no one will ever know what happened to me. Just another name, another MIA, another story no one will believe. I tried to move on. After the war, I did what they tell you to do. Get a job, start a life, forget. But how the hell do you forget something like that? How do you just go back to normal when you know they're still out there? I tried drinking it away, tried keeping the lights on at night, tried telling myself it was just the war messing with my head. PTSD, hallucinations, stress. That's what the doctors called it when I finally broke down and told someone. They gave me pills, told me to talk about my trauma. But I wasn't traumatized, I was marked. The others, what was left of them, felt it too. I talked to Lee once after we got back. He wouldn't even say their names, just whispered into the phone that he still felt like he was being watched. Like any day now, he was going to wake up in that light. He hung up before I could say anything else. A few months later, I found out he put a bullet in his head. No note, no explanation. Just gone, like the others. And I think I understood why. Because it's not just the memories, it's the waiting. That unbearable, endless waiting for something you know is coming but can't stop. And then, last year, it happened. I woke up in my apartment, in my bed, just like any other night, except I couldn't move. I'd had sleep paralysis before, so at first that's what I thought it was, until I noticed the light. It wasn't blinding like in the jungle. It was softer, like it was inside my room, seeping out of the walls, the floor, my own skin. And then I heard it. The hum. Low, pulsing, vibrating in my bones. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would explode. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, and that metallic taste flooded my mouth again, thick and electric. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but I couldn't. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw them. Tall, thin, unmoving, just standing in the doorway. I couldn't make out their faces, if they even had faces, but I felt them watching me, studying me. And just like before, I felt that pressure in my skull. That invisible hand rifling through my mind, flipping through my thoughts like pages in a book. I don't know how long it lasted. A minute? An hour? Time didn't feel real in that moment. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it was gone. The light, the hum, the figures. I could move again, but I didn't. I just lay there shaking, staring at the empty doorway, knowing that they weren't done with me yet. Since that night, I haven't slept right. Haven't lived right. Every time I close my eyes, I wonder if that's going to be the time they finally take me. I've tried to talk about it, tried to find others who've been through the same thing. You'd be surprised how many stories are out there, buried under words like hallucination and delusion. But I know the truth. I've seen it, I've felt it, and I know they're still watching. I don't know why they didn't take me that night. Maybe they already got what they needed. Maybe they're just waiting for the right moment. Or maybe they just like knowing that I know. Because that's the worst part, isn't it? The knowing. Knowing that they're real. Knowing that they can come back anytime they want. Knowing that when they do, no one will believe it. No one will come looking. No one will even know I'm gone. So if one day you hear about me disappearing, don't believe whatever story they tell you. Don't believe the reports or the excuses, because it won't be a robbery gone wrong. It won't be a tragic accident. And it sure as hell won't be suicide. It'll be them. Just like it was with Frakes. just like it was with Rodriguez, just like it's been with God knows how many others over the years. Men who went missing and were written off as casualties of war, lost hikers, deadbeats who just up and left their lives behind. They're out there. They've always been out there, and they don't stop watching. I can feel them even now. Maybe tonight will be the night. Maybe tomorrow. But whenever it happens, just remember this. If you ever see that light, if you ever hear that hum, run, because once they notice you, once they mark you, there's no coming back. Second story, the nighttime stood still. Korean War, 1951. I don't know how to explain what happened to me in Korea. I've tried for years, but every time I try to put it into words, it feels like my mind is fighting back, like something doesn't want me to remember, but I have to get this out. Maybe someone out there has gone through the same thing. Maybe I'm not alone in this. It was 1951, somewhere near the 38th parallel. I was just another Marine, following orders, pushing forward through mud, smoke, and the stench of war. That night, our unit was moving up a ridge, trying to get a better position against the enemy. We were exhausted, our nerves shot. Then I saw it, a light just hovering above the trenches ahead. Not a flare, not an aircraft. It was wrong. Too bright, too still, and then silence. Not just the battlefield going quiet. I mean everything stopped. No wind, no distant gunfire, no sound of breathing. I could see my squad frozen in place, their mouths half open, stuck mid-step. And I was trapped with them, my body refusing to obey. At first I thought I had stepped on a mine, that I was dead, that maybe this was what dying felt like. But I could still see, still think. My heartbeat hammered in my ears, but I couldn't move a muscle. Then the figures came. They floated down from the light, not quite touching the ground. My mind kept trying to make sense of them, but nothing about them fit. They weren't men, but they weren't exactly monsters either. Too tall, too thin. Faces like shadows with piercing, lidless eyes. They moved through us like we weren't even there, brushing their fingers over our uniforms, our weapons. I could feel the weight of their touch, like cold static crawling over my skin. I wanted to scream, but my throat didn't work. Then one of them turned to face me directly. Its eyes locked onto mine, and in that instant, I felt something rip through me, like it was peeling back my mind, unfolding me layer by layer, pulling at thoughts I didn't even know I had. And then the light came. A beam shot down from the craft, swallowing me whole. It wasn't light the way we know it. It was something thicker, something that wrapped around me, invaded me. The last thing I saw was another man from my unit, Carter. I think, standing right beside me, also caught in the glow. His face was twisted in silent terror. Then the world cracked apart. I don't remember what happened after that. 1 second I was on that ridge, and the next I was somewhere else. Not in the sky, not in a ship, someplace outside of everything. I wasn't standing, wasn't lying down. I just was. Time didn't exist there. I didn't exist there, not in the way I understood. I could feel them, their presence like 1,000 voices whispering at once. But the words weren't words. They were thoughts, questions, commands, and something deep inside me knew that whatever they were doing, whatever they were looking for, they had found it. When I came back, I wasn't on the ridge anymore. I was somewhere flat, endless, a barren stretch of land that didn't look like anything I'd seen in Korea. It took me a while to realize I was walking, barefoot, my uniform torn, my rifle gone. The sky was empty, not a single star above me, just a dull, gray nothingness stretching in every direction, My body felt hollow, like something had been scooped out of me, and my mind was wrong. I should have panicked. I should have screamed for my unit. But the fear had been stripped from me, like an emotion I no longer recognized. I wandered forward, feeling the roughness of the cracked earth beneath my feet. Then, out of nowhere, sound returned. The wind hit me first, a sudden roar in my ears, and with it came the unbearable pressure in my skull, like something slamming back into place, forcing me to remember. But remember what? The moment I tried to grasp it, it slipped away, like hands reaching into water and coming up empty. Then I saw headlights in the distance. A military convoy. Soldiers. I tried to call out, but my throat was raw, like I hadn't used it in days. I stumbled toward them, arms weak, vision blurry. The last thing I remember before blacking out was the shouting. Someone grabbed me. And then darkness again. I woke up in a field tent, the sterile smell of alcohol and sweat in the air. My body ached, my muscles stiff. A medic was hovering over me, saying something, but my ears were ringing too much to understand. I blinked up at him, trying to make sense of how I got there. When I finally forced out the words, "Where am I?" his face went pale. "You've been missing for 3 days," he said. 3 days. I tried to argue, to tell him it was impossible, that only minutes had passed. But then I caught my reflection in a small mirror across the tent. My face was sunken, my skin stretched too tight. My lips were cracked, my eyes hollow. I looked starved. 3 days without food or water, and yet I didn't feel hungry. I didn't feel anything. And then the fear hit me. Where was Carter? I asked about him, begged them to tell me where he was. The medic just shook his head. "There was no one else," he said. "You were alone." But that wasn't possible. Carter had been right next to me, trapped in that beam. I saw his face frozen in terror. He should have been here too, but he wasn't, and no one ever found him. They debriefed me, asked the same questions over and over. Where had I been? Who took me? What had I seen? But every time I tried to answer, my mind fought back. There was a wall in my head, something placed there, keeping me from remembering. I could feel the memories like bruises beneath my skin, aching to be let out. But the moment I reached for them, they scattered like ashes in the wind. The higher-ups chalked it up to stress, exhaustion. They told me I must have wandered off in a daze, lost in the desert. But they couldn't explain the time. They couldn't explain why I wasn't dehydrated, why my boots were gone but the soles of my feet weren't torn up from the terrain. They couldn't explain the strange marks on my arms, 3 small circular scars in a perfect line just below my elbow. I stopped trying to make them believe me. They didn't want the truth. Hell, I didn't want the truth. Because deep down, I knew one thing for certain. Carter didn't just disappear. He was taken, and whatever had taken him had let me go. I was discharged not long after that. Psychological trauma, they called it. Combat fatigue. They stamped my papers and sent me home like I was just another broken soldier, another casualty of war. I didn't argue. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to tell myself it was just the stress, just my mind playing tricks on me. But the nights made that impossible. Because that's when the dreams started. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my body locked in place, the ceiling swimming in shadows that moved when I blinked. In those moments I was back there, frozen on that ridge, the figures gliding through the smoke, their touch crawling over my skin. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, and worst of all, I could feel them still watching, still waiting. One night, I woke up gasping for air and my wife found me in the backyard, barefoot in the dirt, staring at the sky. I don't remember walking outside. I don't remember anything between lying down and suddenly standing there. But my feet were clean, no mud, no grass. Like I hadn't walked at all, just appeared. It kept happening. I'd wake up in different places, on the porch, in the hallway, once even in the car with the keys still inside, the door wide open. It was like something was testing me, seeing how far it could take me before I woke up. And every time, I'd feel that same numbness in my limbs, that same absence in my mind, like I'd been somewhere else, but wasn't allowed to remember where. I tried everything. Sleeping pills, locking the doors, even tying myself to the bed frame. One night, nothing worked. My wife begged me to see a doctor, but what could I say? That I was afraid of being taken again. That I could feel them pressing against the edges of my thoughts, waiting for the right moment to pull me back. Then one night it stopped. No more dreams. No more waking up in strange places. Just silence. And somehow, that was worse. Because deep down, I knew what it meant. They were done with me. It's been years now. I've tried to move on. Built a life, had kids, worked a normal job, but no matter how much time passes, I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over, that they're still out there somewhere watching, and every now and then, just for a split second, I swear I feel time glitch around me. A flicker in the air, a pressure in my skull like something shifting just out of reach. And Carter. I think about him more than I should. Sometimes I dream about that ridge again, about the frozen moment when we were both caught in that beam of light. But in the dream, he's not screaming anymore. He's smiling. And his eyes, God, his eyes, they're not his anymore. They're theirs. I don't know why they let me go. I don't know what they did to me while I was gone. And I don't think I ever will. But one thing I do know, they don't always bring you back. I stopped talking about it years ago. The few times I tried, I was met with the same looks. Pity, skepticism, that nervous glance people give when they think you've lost your mind but don't want to say it outright. I got tired of the questions, of the forced smiles, of the inevitable. Maybe it was just stress from the war. So I buried it, locked it up somewhere deep inside me, hoping that if I ignored it long enough, it would just fade into the past, like everything else. But the past has a way of creeping back, slipping through the cracks when you least expect it. And a few months ago, something happened that made me realize I had never really been let go. I had just been left alone. For a while. I was in my garage, fixing up an old radio, one of those old shortwave sets that could pick up signals from halfway across the world if the conditions were right. I wasn't really trying to hear anything, just tinkering, keeping my hands busy. The static hummed in the background, shifting as I adjusted the dials. Then, out of nowhere, the signal cut. Not static, not white noise, just nothing. A silence so deep it felt like the world had stopped again, just like that night on the ridge. And then, through the speaker, a voice. Flat, mechanical, speaking in a language I had never heard before but somehow understood. My hands clenched around the dials, my breath caught in my throat. Because I knew it was for me. It wasn't words, not really. It was more like a thought placed directly into my brain, an idea transmitted across some vast, impossible distance. And the message was simple. We are still here. That was all. 4 words. But they shattered me. I slammed the radio off, my fingers trembling, my chest tight with panic. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the dark reflection of myself in the garage window, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. No lights in the sky, no shadows moving at the edge of my vision. Just silence. But that was the worst part. because now I knew they hadn't forgotten about me. They had just been waiting. For what, I still don't know. But ever since that night, I've felt it again. That glitch. That split-second hesitation in time when the world doesn't feel quite real. The feeling that I'm not completely here, that some part of me was taken and never fully returned. And I fear that one day they'll come back for the rest of me. I haven't told my family. What would I even say? Hey honey, remember how I was abducted by something not of this earth back in Korea? Well, they left a back door in my mind and they've decided to check in after all these years. No, I can't do that to them. They deserve a normal life. So I pretend. I go to work. I sit at the dinner table. I smile when I'm supposed to smile. But every time I pass a mirror, I feel this sick, creeping dread in my stomach, like I'll look into it and see something looking back, something that isn't me. And then there are the nights. The dreams have changed. They're no longer just memories of that night on the ridge. Now I see things I shouldn't be able to see, places that don't exist, things that defy the laws of nature. Sometimes I see Carter, not how he was, but how he is now, wherever they took him. His face is smooth, too smooth, like his features have been erased and redrawn by something that didn't quite understand how human faces work. And his eyes, those empty, depthless eyes. I wake up gasping, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. But I never scream, because deep down, I know the truth. If I scream, they'll hear me, and I don't want them to know I remember. Last night I woke up standing in the backyard again. I don't remember getting out of bed. I don't remember unlocking the door. But there I was, barefoot on the cold grass, staring up at the sky like I was waiting for something. My wife was still inside, asleep. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. That unnatural silence, the same one from the ridge, had settled around me like a heavy fog. My breath felt thick in my throat, my limbs numb. I tried to move, but for a moment, just a moment, I couldn't. And then I saw them. They weren't in the sky. They weren't floating down from some beam of light. They were just there, standing at the edge of my property, barely visible in the dark. Their outlines shimmered, like they weren't fully in this world, like they were bleeding through from somewhere else. The air around them bent and warped, the stars behind them flickering like dying embers. I knew they weren't physically moving toward me, but somehow they were closer every time I blinked. A pressure built behind my eyes, a deep, pulsating throb, like something was pushing against my skull from the inside. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it was over. The air snapped back into place. The sounds of the night rushed in all at once, wind in the trees, distant cars, the hum of the street lamp. I was alone again. But I knew beyond any doubt that they had been there, that they had been watching, and that next time they wouldn't just be watching. I didn't go back to sleep. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee I never drank, staring at the door, half expecting it to open on its own. My hands were shaking. I wasn't cold, but I couldn't stop shivering. I kept checking my arms, my legs, my neck, looking for marks, for anything new. But there was nothing. Or maybe whatever they had done to me this time wasn't meant to be seen. Maybe it was meant to be felt, buried somewhere deep inside, waiting to reveal itself. I've started noticing things, small things. My reflection lags for just a fraction of a second when I turn my head. The clock in my office skips forward sometimes, minutes disappearing, like they never existed. My own voice sounds different when I play back recordings, like something else is speaking, with me, just beneath the surface. And the worst part? The part that makes my skin crawl and my stomach twist into knots? My wife says I've started talking in my sleep, and not in English. I don't know how much longer I can pretend this isn't happening. I don't know how much longer I can keep them from knowing that I know. But I'm afraid. Not just of what they might do to me, but of what I might already becoming. Because the other night, as I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard something. Not outside. Inside. A voice, whispering in the back of my mind, layered over my own thoughts like an echo. It said, "You were never supposed to leave." And for the first time since Korea, I felt truly, utterly helpless. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe because I need someone to know. Maybe because I want proof in case one day I'm just gone. Because I think that's what's going to happen. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. They're waiting, watching. And when the time is right, they'll take me again. But this time, I don't think they'll bring me back. So if you're reading this, if any of this sounds familiar, maybe it means you've felt it too. The gaps in time. The feeling of being somewhere else, but not remembering where. The sense that something is just behind the curtain, waiting for you to notice. If that's the case, then I have only one piece of advice. Don't look up. If you're enjoying this and want to support the channel in bringing more spine-chilling stories like this, any contribution is greatly appreciated. The donation link is pinned in the first comment, and even the smallest support means so much. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Third story. The Floating Soldier of World War I, 1917. I never expected to talk about this again. The war was horror enough, but what happened that day, what I saw with my own eyes, was something beyond fear, beyond reason. It's been over 100 years now, and I doubt anyone alive remembers the battle itself. It was just another clash in the endless nightmare of the Great War. But I remember it. Every sound, every scream, every goddamn smell of burnt flesh and rotting mud. And I remember him. I remember how he floated. It was 1917, northern France, somewhere near the trenches of Passchendaele. The rain had turned the ground into thick, sucking sludge, and the bodies, ours and theirs, lay half-buried in the filth. The air reeked of blood, gunpowder, and decay. I was with a group of British soldiers, huddled in a crater left by an artillery shell, trying to catch our breath before another push. That's when we noticed something strange. A fog, not like the usual morning mist or the smoke from explosions, but something denser, unnatural. It crept in too quickly, wrapping around us in an eerie bluish glow. At first we thought it was gas. Someone shouted for masks, but before anyone could move, the screaming started. It wasn't the scream of a wounded man. It was pure panic. I turned just in time to see Private Williams, the poor bastard, lifted off the ground. His arms flailed, his rifle dropped into the mud, and his face contorted in sheer terror. He wasn't jumping, wasn't being pulled by ropes or wires. He was levitating. We froze. The battlefield was hell, but this was something else entirely. Williams was rising higher and higher, his body twisting unnaturally as if something invisible had taken hold of him. His mouth moved, but no words came out, just desperate, choked gasps. Then suddenly his voice broke through the noise, begging for help. I don't know why none of us moved. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the sheer impossibility of what we were seeing. You can reason with bullets. You can hide from artillery. But this? How the hell do you fight the sky stealing a man away? The fog around him shimmered, pulsed like it was alive. It wrapped tighter around his body, almost absorbing him into its glow. I swear for a brief moment I saw his skin ripple, like water disturbed by a stone. His uniform flickered between real and translucent, as if he was phasing in and out of existence. Then, as suddenly as it began, he was gone. Just like that. No sound, no explosion, nothing. The fog collapsed inward and vanished, leaving behind only empty air where he had been. For a long moment, no one said a word. We just stood there, staring at the spot where Williams had disappeared. Then, as if snapping out of a trance, someone, maybe it was Corporal Hughes, muttered, "What the fuck was that?" That seemed to break whatever spell we were under, because immediately the men started shouting, looking around, checking the sky as if expecting more of us to be plucked away. But nothing else happened. The battlefield was still the battlefield, filled with death, smoke, and the distant echo of gunfire. We searched for him. Of course we did. We combed through the mud, through the bodies, even checked the German side after the battle ended. But there was nothing, not a trace. His belongings were left behind. His pack, his rifle, even the extra rations he had been hoarding. The official report listed him as missing in action. We all knew that was bullshit. Missing in action meant you died somewhere we couldn't find your body. Williams didn't die. Williams was taken. That night, none of us spoke about it. Not directly, at least. We all sat there soaked to the bone, gnawing on stale biscuits, pretending that nothing had happened. But I saw it in their eyes. We were all waiting for another strange fog, waiting for someone else to be ripped from the ground, waiting for the war to finally start making sense again. But it never did. A few days later, when the battle had moved forward and we took what was left of, a German trench, I overheard something that made my stomach drop. One of our translators, Collins I think, was going through some documents taken from a bunker. He found a diary, something handwritten, smeared with mud and blood. The Germans had seen it too. They had watched from their side, saw Williams rise into the air, and thought it was some kind of divine punishment. They had written it down, described the enemy soldier glowing in the mist, his body melting into the sky. One of their officers even noted that some of his own men had fallen to their knees praying. That was when I knew. This wasn't just us losing our minds. The enemy saw it too. And yet, somehow, that made it worse. If it had just been some shared hallucination, the war breaking our minds all at once, I could have lived with that. But if the Germans, the people trying to kill us, saw it just like we did, then it was real. After that, I became obsessed. I started asking around quietly because I knew how it would sound. Soldiers vanish all the time, sure. Blown apart by shells, swallowed by the mud, lost in the chaos. But this was different. No blood, no body, no evidence. Just a man disappearing into thin air. I started looking through records, listening to whispers in the trenches, trying to find even a hint that this had happened before. And then I did. An old sergeant, McCready, pulled me aside one evening, his face pale, eyes darting like he was afraid of something above us. "You saw it too, didn't you?" he muttered. My blood ran cold. He told me about another case months earlier, a soldier from another battalion who had gone missing the exact same way. They said he ran off, but I was there. One second he was digging a trench, the next he was just gone. He exhaled sharply. The light, the mist, the silence, same as what you saw. I asked him what he thought it was, what could do something like that. He just shook his head. Doesn't matter. They don't come back. I don't know why I'm writing this now. Maybe because I'm old and I don't have many years left. Maybe because I need to say it before I go. Or maybe because deep down, I know I'll never have an answer. We told ourselves a lot of lies to get through that war. We told ourselves we were fighting for something greater. We told ourselves we'd make it home. We told ourselves that monsters weren't real. But I saw what I saw. And I don't think Williams was the first. I don't think he was the last. And sometimes, when the nights are too quiet, and the world feels just a little too still, I swear, I still hear him screaming. After the war ended, I tried to leave it behind. I told myself that what happened to Williams was just another nightmare, one of the many horrors buried in those God-forsaken trenches. But the problem with memories like that is that they don't rot like the bodies in the mud. They stay fresh, raw, alive. And no matter how much whiskey I drank or how many cigarettes I burned through, the image of him floating, thrashing against nothing, his face twisted in terror, never left me. It was worse at night. The silence of peacetime had its own kind of violence. I had spent so long surrounded by the chaos of war that the absence of gunfire felt unnatural, like something was missing. I would wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I could hear the hum of that mist, that strange electric buzz that had filled the air before Williams was taken. More than once, I found myself outside, standing in the middle of a dark road, staring at the sky, expecting to see that glow bleeding through the clouds. I never told anyone. What would I even say? That I thought something from above had come for him? That I was afraid it would come for me next? At first I tried to make sense of it in my own way. I went to libraries, looking for anything, any record, any story, any myth that sounded even remotely like what I had seen. I combed through old war reports, newspaper clippings, even religious texts. The closest I ever got were old folk tales. Stories of people vanishing in the woods, of glowing lights over battlefields, of men who walked into fog and never came out. But those were just stories, right? And yet some part of me knew, really knew, that this wasn't just something from a fairy tale. The war had already shown me what men were capable of. But what I saw that day had nothing to do with men. Then, in 1922, I got my confirmation. I was in London, trying to get by like every other poor bastard who had survived the trenches, working as a clerk in some dull office where no one asked too many questions about what you had done during the war. One night, I was drinking alone in some smoke-filled pub when I overheard two men at a nearby table talking in hushed voices about something that made my stomach twist into knots. They were discussing an American pilot, someone who had flown reconnaissance over France in 1918, a year after Williams had disappeared. The man had written letters home about strange lights in the sky, about seeing something hovering over battlefields at night, something that didn't move like any aircraft he had ever seen. The letters stopped suddenly. The official report said his plane had been shot down over enemy territory, but the wreckage was never found. No body, no debris, just gone. I don't know what made me do it, but I leaned in and asked if they had any proof of this pilot's story. One of the men, an older gentleman with a tired face and deep lines under his eyes, looked at me like he recognized something in me. Maybe he saw the same exhaustion, the same unanswered questions eating me alive. He reached into his coat and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "Read this," he said, pushing it toward me. I unfolded it, my hands trembling, and scanned the faded ink. It was a fragment of one of the pilot's last letters. One line stood out, sending a bolt of ice down my spine. "There is something in the clouds, watching us. I see it at night, hovering over no man's land. I don't think it's one of ours. I don't think it's one of theirs. I don't think it's human." I left the pub without another word, my mind spinning. That was it. That was the proof I had been searching for. It wasn't just Williams, it wasn't just me. Something was out there, something had been out there, lurking in the war-torn skies, choosing men like Williams, men like that pilot, and taking them. But why? For what? Were they experiments, observations, some kind of twisted harvest? I had spent so many years trying to convince myself that it had just been my mind playing tricks on me, that the war had shattered my sanity like it had done to so many others. But this meant it was real. I should have let it go. I should have taken that scrap of paper, burned it, and moved on with my life, but instead I became obsessed all over again. I started seeking out other veterans, anyone who had been near Passchendaele in 1917, anyone who had served in areas where strange disappearances had happened. Most laughed me off, but there were a handful of men, who gave me a look I knew all too well. That quiet, haunted expression, like they had seen something they couldn't explain and had spent years trying to forget. They wouldn't talk, not at first. But if you pressed them, if you caught them at the right moment, when the drink was heavy in their blood and their guard was down, they would hint at things. Stories about comrades who had vanished into the fog, about shadows in the sky, about hearing voices from nowhere in the dead of night. It was always the same pattern, a strange mist, an unnatural silence, a flash of light. And then, nothing. I wasn't crazy. I never was. Something had taken Williams, and it had taken others. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could find some kind of answer, some solid evidence that could explain what had happened. But the deeper I dug, the stranger things became. Documents would go missing, reports would be redacted beyond recognition, and more than once I was warned to drop it. A man I met in 1924, an old intelligence officer who had worked in British Army archives, told me in a hushed voice over a pint that certain war records had been intentionally altered. Names erased, dates changed. Files that should have been preserved were simply gone. He didn't know why, but he knew enough to tell me I was sticking my nose where it didn't belong. "There are things you don't chase, lad," he told me, "because the people who do, well, they don't tend to stay around long." At first, I thought he was being paranoid. But then I started noticing things. A man watching me from across the street too many days in a row. Strangers who seemed to recognize me before I even spoke. I started getting the distinct feeling that I was being followed. Letters I had written to other veterans asking about their experiences never got replies. Some of those men, I later found out, had disappeared themselves. Not just gone into hiding, but truly vanished. No records of them traveling, no obituaries, no reports. It was as if they had been erased, just like Williams. One night in 1926, I woke up to a strange humming sound outside my window. Not the sound of a car or a train or anything I could place. It was low, electric, vibrating through my bones. When I pulled back the curtain, the street was too empty, too quiet, like the entire city had gone still. I stayed up until dawn, clutching a knife like it would do any good against whatever the hell I had gotten myself tangled in. But nothing happened. Not that night, anyway. By the 1930s, I had stopped asking questions. Not because I didn't want to know the truth anymore, but because I finally understood. There was no truth to find. Or if there was, it had been buried, so deep that no one like me would ever be able to reach it. Maybe the military knew, maybe entire governments knew, maybe the people who had been taken, people like Williams, had been sent somewhere no one was meant to return from. But I wasn't going to be the next fool to disappear into thin air. I had spent too many years looking over my shoulder, waiting for that glowing mist to wrap around me the way it had wrapped around him. I had stared at the sky too many nights, wondering if something up there was staring back. So I let it go. I stopped talking about it. I stopped looking for other men like me. I stopped trying to understand. But the thing is, when you've seen something like that, when you've witnessed the impossible, it never really leaves you. Even now, in my old age, when the world has changed beyond recognition and the war is just a black and white memory, in history books, I still find myself waking up at odd hours of the night, listening. Because sometimes, when it's too quiet, when the air feels too still, I swear I can hear it. That low, electric hum. I don't know why I'm writing this now. Maybe because I don't have much time left and some part of me still wants someone, anyone, to know what happened. Not just to Williams, but to all of them. The ones the war didn't claim, the ones who didn't fall to bullets or bayonets or disease, but who simply ceased to be. Maybe I'm writing it because I hope that someone out there has seen what I've seen and can tell me that I'm not crazy. Or maybe I just need to get it all out before it's too late. But here's what I know. This wasn't a ghost story. This wasn't some war myth passed down and exaggerated over time. It was real. I saw it. The Germans saw it. And I know that whatever took Williams is still out there. Maybe it's watching. Maybe it's waiting. Maybe it never really left. And if that's the case, then God help us all. I sometimes wonder what it must have been like for him, for Williams, in those last moments. Did he see something inside that mist? Did he understand what was happening before it took him? Or was it just raw, blind terror, the way it was for the rest of us watching? I can't stop thinking about the way his body twisted, the way his limbs flailed in that impossible silence, his mouth open in a scream that was somehow swallowed by the air itself. That's the part that haunts me the most, the soundlessness of it. In a war where everything was deafening, explosions, gunfire, men shouting orders and prayers and curses, the moment he disappeared, it was like the battlefield held its breath. I don't think that was an accident. I think whatever took him, whatever had been watching us from above, wanted it that way. Like it didn't just want to take him, but it wanted us to witness it. Maybe it was testing us, seeing how we would react. Maybe it was always meant to be seen like a warning or a message none of us were capable of understanding. Or maybe it just didn't care. Maybe we were as insignificant to it as ants are to us. I don't know what's worse, the idea that we were chosen, or the idea that we were completely meaningless in the grand scheme of whatever the hell was at work that day. I used to tell myself that if I lived long enough, I'd find an answer. That the world would eventually catch up to what I saw. That one day, I'd open a newspaper and see a headline that made everything make sense. Strange lights over battlefields, or missing soldiers found after decades. But nothing like that ever came. Instead, I watched men walk on the moon, watched the world plunge into another war, watched technology evolve in ways I never could have imagined. And yet, through all of it, no one ever explained what happened that day. No one ever gave me an answer. That's the thing about stories like this, about things that aren't supposed to exist. They get buried. They get dismissed. People don't want to believe in them because they can't. Because if they do, then that means the world isn't what they thought it was. That means we're not in control. And that's a terrifying thought, isn't it? The idea that something else, something bigger, older, unknowable, might be out there, plucking men from the ground like they're nothing, like they're insects caught in a web. The idea that we might just be experiments, or worse, entertainment. No, I'll be dead soon. My body is failing, and I can feel the weight of the years pressing down on me like wet earth over a coffin. But even now, as I sit in this empty house, writing this down in the hope that someone, anyone will read it and believe me. I can't shake the feeling that I haven't escaped it. That somehow, after all these years, I'm still being watched. Maybe I was marked that day. Maybe we all were. Maybe whatever took Williams has just been waiting, patient as time itself, for the moment to come back and finish what it started. And if that's the case, then I suppose I'll see him soon. Wherever he is, I'll end with this. If you ever find yourself in a place where the air goes still, too still, where the world seems to pause and hold its breath, and you hear something, a low electric hum vibrating in your bones, don't look up. Don't let it see you, because if it does, you won't be coming back, just like Williams, just like all the others. So, what did you think of this story? Did it scare you? Was there a part that gave you chills or stuck with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. If you've had a similar experience or have suggestions for improving future videos, let me know too. Thank you for watching and being part of this amazing community. See you in the next story.